what I would like from each of our panelists, I'm going to give you all, before we open up to conversation and Q&A, I'd like for everyone, we're going to start at the table, or maybe, actually, we'll start with Alex, actually, because I think that'll be easiest, and then we'll go down the table. And I just want you to introduce yourselves, your pronouns, let us know, and let us know what your specific field is, because everyone here has a different specialty specifically in audio. So we try to get as encompassing as we possibly could here. So yeah, Alex, you just let us know a little bit about yourself and what you do.
Hey folks, so my name is Alex Cole. My pronouns are he and him. I'm a sound designer primarily. I'm currently the sound designer at PHL Collective. And yeah, I do that full time. Pretty brief summary of what I do, but that's pretty much it. I have a life story. I can say that at some point if you want, but honestly, everyone else is pretty interesting here too. So I'll move on to the next person.
Might be related to one of the questions I have coming down.
What's your
Josie, you have slides here that I
oh sure. I mean, we don't have to change the mic.
Oh,
whoa. Hey, my name is Josie Brechner. My pronouns are she, they. I don't think we should go to the next one, but this one, it just has pictures of some things that I have worked on, am working on. My earliest game was Blossom Tales. I worked on this game Mixolumia, which is super fun. Tartar's Key came out earlier this year, and I'm currently working on Rift of the Necrodancer with a team of five other really cool musicians. So that's been awesome, and happy to talk about that within the extent of my NDA.
Hi, everybody. My name is Cameron Konner. My pronouns are he, him, and I'm a technical audio designer at Bungie working on Destiny 2 and all of its expansions.
This bajillion expansions. Hello, my name. I had to hold my computer. There's a slide attached to it. This is really small. This is really unprofessional. This is my one slide I brought my computer for. My name is Michael Hudak. I'm a freelance.
Can we pass it around?
There you go. No, don't pass. Don't bring it back. I'm truly paranoid someone will drop this. This is my only laptop.
Oh, that's fair.
That's extremely weird. Why am I looking at the screen? I'm a freelance composer, sound designer. That's a great idea. I hope that worked.
You have a very nice Dutch angle to it.
Yeah, perfect. Some more recent things I did were this game called Lamagachi, which is basically a rip of Tamagotchi, but it was essentially Nintendogs, but you're taking care of an alpaca in the forest rather than a dog in a room, which is really cool. And that was an iOS game. And then I'm doing Impacted Iwata is a Kickstarter book chronicling the life of Satoru Iwata, who was Nintendo's big idea dude who passed away in 2015. And there's a huge Kickstarter project for it, and they crushed all their milestones, and one of the milestones was making an album attached to the audiobook. And so I'm doing a track for that, which is really fun. And before, let's see, I've been in game design for 5.5, 6 years. And before that, I was a production assistant at WXPN for a couple of years, just down the block, doing recording bands and helping up, set up, stuff like that. So yeah, I'm the last. I want to give it back to Alex, but we're going to hear he talked. So that's it. Thank you. It's over. Everybody go.
Fantastic. So like I said, we have a really great range of different audio skills here represented, which I think is awesome. So as I was saying to our panelists earlier, we are going to keep this fairly light. So we're open to questions. And if folks in the Zoom want to start queuing up your questions, there is a Q&A option there. So you can just start putting your questions into the Q&A. We'll read those as we get to it, as well as the focus on the room. That being said, I have some questions of my own to kind of get this kicked off. And I'm going to start with what was kind of getting alluded to earlier when we started with Alex is I'm just kind of curious to hear from all of you how you kind of got started in audio and in particular your different fields of audio, because I think a lot of times you hear audio, you think composer or you think music, and maybe you have like general like kind of sound effects. But again, it is a very kind of broad category that I don't think a lot of people realize. So yeah, I'm kind of curious to hear what your origin stories are, honestly. And anyone can feel free, anyone can start.
Should we do snake style or just like go back?
Yeah, why not?
I really liked playing games when I was a little kid, and I've been making music for a long time, probably since like the last 20 years. And I've been thought about getting into game design for a long time. I did not go to school for it. I went to school at Temple for political science and wanted to go to law school. And then when I was a senior, I changed my mind. So that was that. And then I always loved games and always appreciated games and music and how it focused on earlier games, how they focused on melody. And I always like kind of the cheapy 16-bit, 8-bit era of things, because you just something about the cheapness of it I thought was very endearing. And I had like a total kind of like stretch of years. I just went into like weeb mode and I moved to Japan for 2 years, which was really fun, and taught English there. And before that I was in playing in a bunch of bands, always doing like music related things, but not as a career. And so eventually I started to slowly get into it as a career. That's where I am
now. I recorded a lot of bands in Philly for many years, and then got super burnt out doing that and was looking for other audio related interests that I could pursue, and sort of just like found like Philadelphia game mechanics and started going, and it's just like, oh, this is cool and different, and like I can make sounds or music for games and whatever. And I started to get more interested in that. And as I was doing that, I just kind of fell more and more in love with like the technical side of audio for games. So much so that like a lot of what I do on a day-to-day basis these days doesn't even really like sometimes I don't really listen to anything for the game that I'm making, or it's a lot of like tool building for composers and sound designers to like make their lives like easier getting stuff into the game, and recognizing like conventions or patterns for how, you know, X game does whatever, and try and make a tool set that like better fits that game, I guess. And I'm really into it, kind of obsessed with it.
Similar to Mike, I was also a poli-sci undergrad major.
Oh, no way.
And thought I wanted to work in marketing for a while until I started going to marketing interviews, and they'd be like, when do you want to start working? And I'm like, never, actually. So I was like, I think I should do something else with my life. This was back in 2012. And I was just doing also random music stuff. Grew up playing in bands, grew up playing drums. And eventually realizing that wasn't fitting for me either. And so there was a guy in New York who was making Creative Commons music for indie video games, kind of releasing them online into Creative Commons, mostly on Free Music Archive. And I was playing pretty much every game on indiegames.com in that era. This was like 2015.
Oh, yeah.
And I just started hearing his music in multiple games. I was like, I can do that too. Like that's easy. So I made like an album of like Creative Commons open source music and released it out there. And it just weirdly picked up traction. Like it was just random. Like, you know, there's so much in everyone's careers, I'm sure, that's going to be really random, both in how you made decisions and how you wound up in specific places. So, but that landed me my first gig because Blossom Tales had a composer who couldn't finish the music, and they had been using my music as placeholder music, and then just reached out to me. So, yeah, it's a good argument for just getting yourself in as many places and in front of as many people as possible when you're trying to figure out where to start out.
Very true.
Totally. Okay, I guess it's my turn then. So I graduated college way back in 2009 with a degree in music and philosophy, with the intent on going to grad school for music something. Of course, that happened to be right in the middle of the recession, and I moved to a place where there weren't any colleges, and I had plenty of student loans, so that didn't happen. Sometime in the middle of college, though, I realized that, oh, sound design's really cool. Sounds are really cool. I really like listening to things, maybe making them too. So that was always in the back of my mind. Through a couple of years of being very, not exactly unemployed, but pretty close to it, I was learning how to use the early versions of Isotope RX cleanup software and stuff like that, and trying to record my own stuff, my own sounds. Got a gig doing live theater very briefly, because it turns out I'm very bad at doing sound design for live theater because I'm not very good at operating a mixing board. Okay, so we moved closer to Philly. I was able to take some courses at Montgomery County Community College, and then my health insurance ran out. So for some years, I just had a full-time job doing completely unrelated stuff, because I needed that, because that was before the Affordable Care Act, and I had a pre-existing condition. Eventually, a friend of mine was able to bring me to a meeting at Philly Dev Night at the Philly Game Forge. Shout out to Ada Graves, by the way. And I went to those meetings and did game jams there, and went to those meetings and did those game jams from, I guess, 2016 until, well, question mark, now, I guess. So I got a lot of experience working with folks in the Philly scene, as well as just, making friends. Fast forward to 2021, I was absolutely fed up with that full-time job, was able to save enough money for me to just prepare to quit finally. PHL Collective actually approached me about a week before I was going to submit my 2 weeks notice at my previous job. Asked if I wanted to help them with their game that we released earlier in the year, Justice League Cosmic Chaos, to help with sound design and implementation into Unity. I jumped the hell on that, of course I did, and I've been with them since. Currently, basically, I do sound design in Fmod and Unity. I'm a composer too, well, as a hobby. But that's about it.
Awesome, very cool. So we already have a decent number of questions that popped up into the Q&A. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to jump into the Q&A real quick and check the top one. But anyone here in person wants to also ask a question, raise your hand. I'm going to come around with the mic, and yeah, we're going to kick this off, I think. So we got a question from Ryan here, who's asking for any advice or experience on approaching contracts and licensing agreements, and what are the differences between, say, for freelance versus a AAA contract?
I mean, I guess I'm someone who kind of, not quite AAA, but Rift is definitely like a sort of double A or double I or whatever the terminology is. It's complicated, and if you're able to usually have a lawyer look over everything, once you're getting into like larger projects, I still don't do that. I just sit with the contract and really read through. But the big like sort of thing you want to be making sure in contracts you're presented with is whether or not your work is going to be work for hire or not. most standard indie freelancing contracts for musicians should be exclusive licensing. That's pretty much like 98% of the time what I end up doing. So that's where you're basically giving them the right to use your music in the project, saying that you won't give that right to anyone else, but you still retain control of the music and often full control over the sale and distribution of that music yourself. So, you know, if you're selling it on Bandcamp or putting it on your website, you can charge people for that music, yada, yada, yada. But I have worked on projects in the past where I have sold the copyright and had it done work for hire, but retained the right to sell the music. So there's always, you know, flexibility in negotiation, but generally if someone's going to take the ownership of your music, or, I mean, I guess in sound design, and y'all can talk about this more too, it's more often work for hire, but in music, yeah, if someone wants to take the ownership or the copyright of your music, then you should charge, you know, threefold basically than your typical rate.
I'm gonna pass on this one. I don't personally have too much experience with independent licensing for sound and music.
I think Josie hit on all the big points really that I can think of. What was the question? It was about licensing agreements and AAA versus freelancing.
Yep.
I know with freelancing, it all depends on. A lot of times we're working with like a lot smaller budget, so it's kind of you can use things. The licensing agreements can be pretty, maybe even really as flexible as you want them, as long as you're making music for somebody and they like it. They can be kind of like things can be pretty malleable. Yeah, I don't really think of anything specific to add. I don't know about Alex's. With sound design, it's usually different. Sound design, you make the sounds and the person you make the sounds for, they own the sounds basically, because you don't really want to. I guess you can have like a sound pack or something but for the most part, it's like here's a sound that lasts 1 second. You're not going to sell that as like an album or something, so that's less of an issue. But
If you're doing sound design as work for hire, it presumably the contract is also going to specify that the company is not going to be able to sell the sounds that you create for them, for a bunch of reasons, actually. But if for some reason they want to sell those sounds, I'd be wary of that.
yeah.
For sure.
Maybe we had
Yeah, I want to check. We have a question from the room.
Okay.
You good?
I was going to ask in the kind of the payment space, but I feel like a lot of that was covered in this topic. On that, actually, I'm curious if any of you have done anything like library work, like submitting sounds or sending it for non-specific projects, but for maybe like a library or something like that. And if you have, what kinds of experiences you've had. But I'm not sure if anybody has done that space.
I haven't
It
personally.
is on my list of things that I will do if I ever have the free time. I've got all the stuff prepped for it, but no time.
Yeah, I haven't either, but I do have, you know, peers and stuff who have done that and have found it worthwhile or gotten pretty big placements from that. So it's definitely a route to explore. There's a bunch of different houses that sort of will bring people in to do that, but usually they won't pay you up front. They'll pay you only if your stuff gets placed somewhere. So if you have the time to do that stuff and are just one of those people who can spit out a ton of different tracks in different styles, it can be worth it, but there's definitely risk involved.
Follow
Yeah,
up.
follow up.
Yeah, another question. So you talked about building tools for audio, and are those tools for both audio and music, first of all?
Sorry, so just
Okay.
the question was building tools for audio and other stuff, question mark?
Yeah. What do you use to build your tools in? Like, are you building them in engines? Are you building them as standalone software? Or what is your typical?
Yeah, it's honestly a
Can you
mix of.
repeat the question for folks online too?
Sure. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris.
What are the tools just for music? Are the tools just for sound design? And what are you using to build the tools? Are they in engine or are they external? I think that was okay, cool. Really whatever the project calls for and whatever is available. So for example, at least the team I work on, our audio middleware uses Wise, and our composers use, I think, a plethora of DAWs, but mostly the last step before it gets downstream to implementation is going to be Pro Tools. And what I try to do is like recognize, okay, what is something that these composers are doing every time before they're delivering assets to be implemented into the game, and how can we streamline that? How can we write, JavaScript stuff that will automate these sessions and the editorial to make it easier to get everything consistently named or whatever? And how can we build scripts that will take these assets and implement them into the middleware in data structures that, again, are consistent. I think the game that I work on, Destiny, is kind of a weird case because it's a live game. So there's always just a lot of content. And at this point, I mean, the game's been out for so long, there is a ton of content. And the thing that we try to make sure of is that if we ever have to go back and look at stuff like how things are hooked up, is that consistency is key. We don't want things like hooked up one way and then hooked up a different way, and then they can get really messy to try and look for things. But yeah, I mean, with Wise specifically, it's kind of like tool agnostic as far as like what you're scripting. I personally like to use C# to automate Wise stuff, but I know it can accept Python as well. And I mean, I really wish I didn't have to automate Pro Tools, but that is unfortunately, there's a cool app called SoundFlow that has made it a bit easier and essentially gives you like a JavaScript environment to automate Pro Tools on a Mac, which was like not an easy thing to do in years past. Yeah, I mean, it'd be cool if folks used Reaper more, because that stuff is just wide open to scripting. Yeah.
Over to you.
Yeah.
I guess I got a pretty simple question. What's sort of like your asset pipeline or tech stack from idea to sound in a game?
You're talking about sounds or music specifically, or? Well, with music, it's mainly just like, it could any number of ways, but it's basically like, here's a level where this person is making. Sometimes they give you a reference track from YouTube, like a YouTube link, like this is what it could sound like. Or this is like the tempo I kind of want, this is the instrumentation I kind of want. And you make a little sketch, and if they like the sketch, then you keep going. And from there, you kind of just, sometimes you communicate with the person, like, do you want me to check in with you every day, every 3 days, like every 10 days? So I don't like spend a week making music and then you don't like all of it. And then, yeah, from there, it's just kind of like, eventually you'll have revisions. Usually you have at least a few revisions built into your contract. So you probably ask to be revised some part of the music at least once or twice or 3 times. And then it's in their hands, and that's in the game at some point. For sounds, I don't know, Alex, do you want to answer with the sound part, or?
Yeah, I do have a workflow and pipeline. I can give you an ideal one, which is probably better than necessarily what it is going to be. So obviously it's, you first need to determine the need for a sound. For a game, if I'm just coming into it fresh, for me, that often involves just playing the game, looking at design documents, whatever, just determining all of the sounds that I'm going to know that it needs. This is going to change eventually. But So now that once I've determined the need for a specific thing, behavior, it's an issue of getting the source together for that. So recording my own sounds, synthesizing, using library stuff, and combining all that together to make the basis of a sound. And making sure the system is in the game to actually implement it. And if not, designing that system, or faking that system and designing something else that kind of roughly sort of does that. Because video games, of course, are, put together with duct tape, popsicle sticks, and cards. Just a big, gigantic house of cards that is hopefully not going to fall. So it's design the sound. Probably in my DAW, I use Reaper. Possibly to animation, possibly not. Put that into whatever middleware I can. I'm using. I use Fmod primarily, but if in the future I used Wise, I guess Wise, sure. And yeah, just get it hooked into the gameplay and test it in the gameplay. Being in-house, I actually have the luxury of doing that testing and figuring out if I've designed all of the parameters in Fmod to sound correct as they play in game. So I test it. And then this process repeats. Possibly if something is iterated upon, I need to redesign how it's put into the game. Maybe the feature's removed entirely, a new feature's added, and so forth and so on throughout production. Now I see that there is, I suppose the asset tracking thing, which has been asked in chat, is something we should probably address on its own, but that also gets involved there. So I gave you a long rambling answer. It's a long rambling process. So.
Okay.
I was going to say, it was just really briefly, an important part of my process, which is, similar in some ways, where you make a track, do revisions, put it in the game, test it. A big part of my process is just listening to the song I made, just like over and over and over again,
6,000.
as I walk around the city, or, late at night, just like, how does this feel at 2:30 a.m.? Just to see if anything stands out and catches me at a weird moment, a different time of day. So I can go back the next day and smooth it out if it's still bugging me.
Cool. I'm going to use that as a opportunity to add on to with what Ryan had asked at the top of the Q&A online about how do you approach asset tracking, and if there are any tips for doing that in Excel. Alex, I saw you kind of lean in before I was going to so I don't know if you wanted to add on anything as well to what Josie was saying, as well as kind of get us kicked off with the asset tracking.
As far as asset tracking, PHL uses ClickUp. That's actually pretty good for that. You can add and remove columns at will, and productivity software is actually pretty decent for that. However, in Excel, just make sure you honestly just have I usually put a category and a subcategory as my left two columns. I've got my eyes closed because I haven't done this in a while. I'm just trying to remember what it is. So it's category, subcategory, asset name or effect name. Possibly the character, a number of assets, but more importantly, whether it's been implemented, where it's been implemented, if there's an event name in Fmod or whatever, and how complete it is. Using colors helps. And yeah, make your spreadsheet as pretty as you can, because you have to look at it a bunch. That's and I really do mean that. Otherwise, it will get overwhelming, depending on the number of assets you have to do or you have to use. That's pretty much it.
Yeah, I was curious how Bungie does it, just like what it looks like on the inside.
Awesome.
Cameron can speak about that.
Yeah, different subdisciplines within the audio space handle their task tracking a little differently. We essentially use something akin to Excel to varying degrees of success. Kind of what Alex was saying, like making it pretty is really important. I'm really into that because if you look at some kind of sheet that has like hundreds or thousands of assets and things aren't color coded or just like unclear at a first glance, like I can get really turned off by that kind of stuff. But yeah, I mean, I like having I guess in Excel would be akin to like conditional arguments, but when you have like an approval column, you know, like this is ready to be heard, it's not exactly approved yet, or like this hasn't been started at all, or the hooks are in here so that when the sounds are ready, you know, that part doesn't have to be done. But like having a full and clear, I guess, a visual representation of like the pipeline of like this has been started, this has been, the sound itself has been reviewed, the implementation has been started, the implementation has been reviewed, it's been tested in game. Having like all those columns like might seem like overkill, but I think it's really important to have that all laid out so that you could like have somewhat of a written record of what the process was. It's nice to be able to see, especially like something needs to be recreated or re-implemented, like to see where the pain points were, so that next time you can look out for that kind of stuff. At least that is my experience.
I hesitate to agree with it, but I do actually agree with having more columns being better, because you do a lot of things to a sound in a video game, and there are a lot of steps along the way. A lot of have I designed the sound fully? Is it implemented in exactly the right way? Is this object, does it have all of the necessary sounds attached to it? Because boy, does that object do 7 things, and I need to make sure all 7 of them are accounted for and finished. So,
yeah, they're all different, and I guess you don't really want to be in a situation where you're putting a lot of information in a cell, in a column, in an Excel sheet, or anything you can do an Excel sheet. Like the worst comes to worst, you don't use a cell or you don't use a column and it kind of goes unused. But like, I feel like the worst case scenario is when you're writing like a novel in an Excel sheet of like, this has been started, but I think I might want to like redo this part, and it also hasn't been implemented, and the implementation has to change because I heard that the animation was going to change down the line, and like then it just starts to get even more messy. My worst nightmare.
I think
You can do the like.
yeah. I think I heard like brief mention of like pre-existing libraries in use in sound design. I guess I'm curious, like how often you feel, or how often you use pre-existing sounds, where you may source pre-existing sounds when doing sound development, and I guess any advice, things to look out for in that space, or if you record things a lot. I guess just really just the sources of sounds before you start modifying things, like yeah, generally the space of where you source your kind of starting points for sounds. It passes back.
Sure. I mean, I've used some big libraries for sound stuff. There's a lot of, I mean, the sound designer mains can maybe like sort of answer this a little bit better than I can. But for music recently, I've been actually using Splice, which is a cool production tool. I see some nodding here. The riff of the Necrodancer music is like a lot more clubby than the general stuff I've made for other games. And so like I can make a wash or like a reverse crash or whatever, like that's all super easy to do, but it's even easier to just drag it out of Splice into my software. And Splice lets you also audition extra loops and stuff that you might want to layer into. So I don't really like use too many loops, but for just testing stuff out or trying new ideas, I've been using it for like 2 months now, and it's actually been awesome. So definitely recommend producer folks to check that out.
I don't have too big of a library of external sounds, but when I was doing sound design for the game Smelter, I would just try to think of like what it was I was looking for and how, like, in that moment, would it be easier for me to record the sound or drag it from a library? Explosions were always I don't know if the stream went down or if Alex was
I brought up my library.
Like if something called for an explosion or the sound needed to be based out of an explosion, I'm not going to try and like, I'm really not going to spend my time trying to like make that happen, you know, in my apartment or in my house or whatever. Even if it's just like gonna have a lot of processing on it and sound.
Even if it would be really cool.
Yeah, even if it would be really cool. But something akin to like water movement in a game. It's like, I can just fill up the bathtub and like take my like portable recorder and like move my hand in there and get that done real quick, exactly how I want it for my circumstance, or like walk down by the creek or whatever. I really, you know, really just whatever the sound calls for, I guess. And yeah.
I think Alex was the show is giant.
Yeah. So. Yeah. Okay. So So yeah, there's a fairly complex answer here. I guess to start with, I don't know if the cursor is visible on the Zoom window. Sure. Yeah, there's a lot of sounds in the sound library, and I haven't finished importing the new stuff in there recently.
I like small butane torch sustains burn.
Yeah, that now see that is one that that's from a sound library that I bought the rights to some years ago. But so the answer is kind of different here depending on whether you work in-house or whether you work as a freelancer. What is, I think, most important is to have the rights to literally everything that you put into the game for probably obvious reasons. And if you're working in-house, more likely, or the company you're working for is going to need to purchase that license. Otherwise, you will have to purchase that license, but can carry that license to multiple projects. Which is to say, you accumulate a big library of sounds over years and years and years and years. But if you're working in-house, as I said, that's not quite the same. This is the amount of sounds I have at PHL. It's 50,000 as opposed to about 100. So as far as where to source those libraries goes, I usually have, for the years, bought stuff at asoundeffects.com. They're just, they've been a pretty good, pretty useful one-stop shop for sound libraries for years and years. Things to look for that is if you're using a sound, like if you're using some sort of library application, having some sort of compatibility with universal category systems important. But regardless, commercial libraries I usually buy from there. There's always classic stuff like Boom libraries and stuff like that. Those are quite expensive though. I also participate in the field recording Slack's crowdsourced sound libraries, and where a bunch of sound recordists collaborate on a sound library, contribute something to it, and they all get the sounds from it, which is where a decent amount of the stuff in this library comes from. It's stuff that I've recorded and contributed, as well as stuff that other people have. So that's, and each of those sounds you can use as source in creating a sound for the game. Usually I don't do any direct pulls from a library. Doing something to the sound is at the very least useful, if not just justifying your existence. But there's that, but also usually it's an issue of layering a bunch of different sounds on top of each other. I
What
do,
you-
however,
Sorry,
excuse me.
what you don't want to do is what I did the first few game jams I did, just go on YouTube and use Audacity to record.
Oh God, don't do that ever.
And then not credit them. Don't do that.
Yeah, or at the very least, don't tell me that you've done that. People have, but yeah, so there's that. But I also do plenty of my own recording, especially now that I can't, for one thing, go to libraries, but also it's much more useful to be able to record some Foley to, well, not picture, but necessarily, but to the circumstance that you have versus, say, being stuck with the slide whistle sound being versus you only have one of those. It's very annoying to try and make it work in game. Is being able to customize the length or customize your performance, or just actually using sounds that you know how to use. That's something I've found personally is helpful, is the sounds that I've recorded, even for those crowdsourced libraries, I end up using them more than a lot of the other stuff because I have picked them myself as sounding good.
All right, I'm going to start moving around the room to ask questions and get the questions in the room. Rob's going to help me out with the Q&A online, but we have a question here.
Oh, well, actually, that question ended up being answered after us because I was going to ask about what's it called? Whether you had ever like directly used like sound library sounds, but I think that was pretty answered. It's like maybe on occasion, but as little as possible, probably kind of space. I figure.
I do want to say, I think there's like a weird elitist standpoint out there against using presets in music, you know, whether like that's based in your DAW choice, like FL Studio or Logic or whatever. You know, there's that guy who like recorded a pig and made an album out of the pig sounds. And like, he's like, I would never reuse a sound or use an unalterated sound in my life. And I think that's silly, personally. So if the sound works for what you're doing, then just use it. Like, who cares? And if someone recognizes it, unless it's like the Wilhelm scream, like literally, like it's probably fun.
Doesn't matter.
Yeah.
The PlayStation 1 startup sound is a preset.
Yeah, exactly. And the drum loop from Umbrella Rihanna is literally is like a garage band drum loop. So
Same with a bunch of stuff from Bastion soundtrack, actually.
yeah.
You ever see the thing where what's it called? The Gorillas. What was it? Was that Feel Good Inc. or Clint Eastwood? It was just a preset on the machine.
Like a Casio.
Yep.
Yeah,
Exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, on a lot of old like N64 sounds, like you know, sound fonts that we associate with Mario 64 are old Roland patches, you know, like Dar Doctor, like whatever, you know. So.
Honestly, I collect things. I have this weird background on because I'm in a temporary office, which is kind of half finished. But right over to my left is a big stack of those old Roland and Korg synthesizers, and they are all presets.
Nice.
That is.
You're still showing your library, by the way.
Oh, well.
Wow.
I mean, if you want to, I can even play stuff from it, but yeah, let's not screen share. But I mean, it's over there. That's the only difference. Either way, it's the appreciation of presets is good. But yeah, more or less, I personally don't usually use direct pulls simply because they're not usually useful enough. The thing about with a lot of sample libraries and stuff like that for games, at least, or the famous stuff, so the the Wilhelm scream, for example, or any Hollywood Edge stuff, there aren't that many variants in that, and you need variants in games. So that's really the only serious thing. Otherwise, just make sure you have the rights to everything you use, and famous sounds start standing out.
Other questions in the room?
Behind you, Adrian.
All right, so I don't know if this question does have an answer. I'm fairly uninitiated in this area. So say, I'm coding a game or I'm doing level design or, I've built the world. I'm hiring you to do game audio or I'm hiring you to compose something for the game. What are some things that I can do to make your life easier, either within the code itself or as a person? What are some things that I should not do that will make your life more difficult?
Good one.
I could tell you some things you shouldn't do. Well, it all, I mean, there's so many different styles of communication and styles of directing a team of people and even directing like a team of audio people. But I mean, in terms of music, I found that if you don't like the music, just say it. So like, I know you don't like it, so I can pick something else, and don't wait until it's too late. And don't, you know what I'm saying? Don't wait until it's like several days or weeks in. We're just like, oh, can you just like change the drums on this? Which I can change the whole song. And then just it all just kind of depends. Some people are like kind of hands off and let you do your thing, and some people they want you to check in with them every 48 hours or whatever. I guess for sound people, I don't know, Cameron, do you want to answer that? I think it's like a more slightly professional sense.
If you want to involve a sound designer, I think it is important to fully understand like how involved on the technical side they are capable or want to be, because that really, I mean, is going to correlate with like what kind of help you're going to be offering them. So like, for example, your example of like you're blocking out a level and you want to know like how you can make their lives easier. Well, are they going to be the ones scripting in the hooks for ambience? Are they going to be the ones like placing the objects in the world for like what is going to be making sounds? If they're not, then you're going to have to be the one who's relaying when a hook is ready to go into the game. Like, hey, this is what X, Y, and Z is called, and here's how you can hook into it and get the sounds playing. If they are going to be more involved in like putting it in themselves, something I have had varying experiences with have been like style guides almost. So it's like it's your level, right? Like you're blocking out the level. So or you're doing the gameplay scripting, and now you're going to have some sound designer come in and they're going to be involved in the scripts or in like the layout of your level. If like Unity, game object tree, or Godot, a node graph, or whatever the Unreal counterpart is for that. As long as they adhere to the style guide of your game or scripts, I mean, you don't want like random changes from person to person within a script or a level. For me, it always goes back to like, if you're trying to track down a bug later in development, and something is related to audio, but it also touches other parts of the game, now you're like looking through two different kinds of workflows at the same time, and it can get really messy really fast and then get really frustrating. So I guess involve audio early on and be really clear about what it is they're going to be doing, or ask them what they're capable of doing, or what kind of work they want to put into it, because that's going to directly affect like the rest of the development process. Really rambling answer, but yeah, sorry.
That's all accurate. I personally, my thought is if you want to be the one handling the coding, just make sure that the engine as you use it is going to be able to support decently complex enough audio behavior. Unity's stock audio engine doesn't support a lot of basic or more basic functionality. So if you're going to be doing the coding, make sure at the very least that you have the ability to randomize the list of sounds if you're playing a one-shot sound, for example, or making sure that you can alter the pitch for each one, which involves building out your own one-shot, your own discrete one-shot capabilities versus the Unity's audio engine. And anyway, I think my point is hopefully gets across there that those systems aren't necessarily going to be in there. And as Cameron said, being clear to whoever your audio person is, what they're going to need to do is key. But if you want to be the one to do that, make sure that the game will be able to handle at least slightly complex audio behavior.
I was just going to quickly add, like from a more like top-down perspective, I feel like a lot of devs who are not that versed in audio stuff have a tendency to under scope out what their audio needs are for a game. So we'll like not be thinking about like, okay, we need a music stinger when we transition from the title screen to the first level, you know, stuff like that. Where an audio person will be like, okay, it's actually really common to have something here, you know, death music or you know, there's small things that really make a game feel juiced on an audio front. It's just like if you're not, you know, if you're not thinking about that, if you don't have that mindset, it's easy to look past that. So yeah, both on a music and sound design front. On a music level, I always just really appreciate having like references to stuff that you, even if you don't know what you want specifically, just stuff that you like or that feels close. Because I think a lot of freelance composers are really good and have made careers off of distilling the general vibe of what you want into something more tangible. So the more that you can sort of feed into the mystery box so that we can spit out something concrete, the more helpful that is.
And I will absolutely second the fact that people really do underscope how much audio goes into a game. Every single game I've been on has had a much smaller initial asset list given to me than even when I first seed the game, long before it's anywhere near feature complete. It's an immense difference. And honestly, that's part of why you should, or that's part of why one would hire a sound designer, is so that they can actually find that stuff. But yeah, that's entirely correct.
All right, we have a question from the Q&A panel. Alex McGee. As someone just getting started with composing music for games, what would you recommend for combining melody, bass, percussion in a way that sounds good? I've loosely learned music theory and I can occasionally make decent melodies, but I struggle to make a full song that sounds cohesive when adding more than a single instrument. Do you recommend certain courses, books, or tutorials? Help.
Yeah, I mean,
I added that.
it sounds like there are numerous of folks on this panel who got into making music before we really knew much music theory. And so for me, I've always trusted my ear, but it sounds like this person, maybe Alex, doesn't really trust their ear yet. So, I mean, yeah, there are courses, of course, and YouTube channels like 8-Bit Music Theory, where they really break down a lot of stuff compositionally. There's other places like Song Exploder, where they break down, it's like a podcast where they break down the production of a song, so you can hear all the different parts that went into it, and that's really awesome. But yeah, just finding a song you like and trying to recreate it yourself as much as possible with the tools you have, I feel like is always like a really good way to learn what's the difference between what you're doing and what someone else has done? So, by doing that, you get to understand how they built their song, what are the different components, how do those pieces fit together? And then how does the structure of the song itself work, And once you can sort of get a sense of song structure and get a sense of orchestration, then instead of trying to tackle it all at once, breaking a song down into different individual pieces, I think makes it a lot more approachable in the end. Cameron, you don't have to pass the mic. You are also a composer.
I am not really a composer for games.
Fair enough.
I don't know, I think Josie's answer was really good. It's you can't. I think I learned to write music by listening to music, and I don't have any formal. I took bass lessons for like a year and a half when I was a teenager, and other than that, I have no formal music education whatsoever. And I think the question said an ear for melody. If you have an ear for melody, that's like a third of the battle already won, to be honest with you, in my opinions. Well, it depends on what music you're making, but start. I mean, there's so many ways you can take it, but you can start by just having a basic piano sound and then try having your melody, and then try just what you could do is start and then have a second piano and just try a counter melody, just like 2 notes on top of each other, and see what sounds good, and just go from there. And if you hate the process, stop. That's what I would say, because a lot of people force themselves to learn music theory because they think they have to, because there's so much information on YouTube and you're just inundated with a bajillion music production and mixing and theory videos. You can watch them for literally years, and like it's a good jumping pad to jump off of. But I think just making 10 horrible songs, and like maybe you'll make your 11th song will be like half decent. So in so many words. So I'm just learning is good. Watching theory videos is fine, but just like making stuff yourself. And if you have an instrument that you like to play, that would also kind of, I could talk about forever, but that's basically start there.
The way I'm reading this question, seems it, let's see, struggle to make a full song that sounds cohesive when adding more than a single instrument. It might be worth just taking a look at, if you're emulating a very specific style, take a look at the background, transcribe stuff from that style, and learn what the bass, keyboard, percussion are doing. Just in whatever style you're looking at, although if it's orchestral, of course, that transcribing that's a nightmare. Just getting very familiar with the ins and outs of something, not caring if it's original or not, is very important in this case. You're learning to emulate, and then you learn to be creative on top of that. I think that may have had, if there's more detail that you'd want from that, just let me know. I would suggest emulating and transcribing what the bass and percussion are doing, or the keyboards and percussion are doing, or whatever, in a specific style, and you might get a better clue.
Yeah, I think to add on to this, what Alex was saying, I think the common mistake for new composers is mixing too many of the same kinds of frequencies. And so when you think of any ensemble, every ensemble is built to naturally have good mixing. So like in a jazz ensemble, you have bass, drums, and piano. So the bass is playing all the low end, the piano's playing a lot of middle frequencies often, and then the drums are adding a lot of high frequencies with the very metallic sounds like cymbals and stuff like that. And in the orchestra, you have the low strings, the bassoons, the trombones, and they're all adding that bass. And then you have all the middle instruments, like your clarinets and your violas. And then you have your high instruments like your harp and your violins and your flutes and stuff. So if you can think about splitting palette of instruments you're using into this sort of like low, middle, and high category, and making sure you're not using too many of the same notes. If you're even looking at piano roll, just like selecting all the MIDI and seeing if you're clustered anywhere, that could be a good way to start to see just at a general sense if you're building up too much in a way that might be obfuscating some of the sounds you're trying to clarify musically.
Hello again. I guess I've got a couple quick questions and then one that's like a little more substantial. I guess since we're on the subject of mixing, and in some fields of music, usually like mixing can be passed on to someone else. But for this type of stuff, I'm curious with you guys if typically you're mixing your own things, or if you do pass that along to anyone else.
Like 100% of the time, yeah.
You pass it along?
No, I do it.
You mix it
Yeah,
yourself?
no one has the budget to like pay a
That's-
professional mixer, yeah.
That's what I figured a little bit. Is that same kind of generally around?
This isn't strictly games. This isn't games at all, honestly. But the last project that I composed, I found I was incapable of mixing it myself. I don't know if that's burnout or what.
Yeah,
But-
but you hear yourself a lot.
Yeah, so I just, I decided to give to someone else, and I had a really positive experience doing that because it was just funny. I don't know, just years of like working on other people's music or working on my own music and being in the box and dealing with all the stuff that comes with mixing a song. A lot of my notes always boiled down to like, I think that should be louder. I think that should be quieter. And I didn't really have too much more to say. Maybe the engineer was just great that I worked with. But I just found it interesting because I don't know. I could be tweaking stuff for forever, and I was, and not making a difference. I don't know. And it's funny these days if I go back to that same project, and I guess this really isn't really specific to games, but if I go back to that same project and I listen to the difference of my bounces, difference of my mixes, like between 2 days where I was probably sitting on my computer for hours and hours, like this shit doesn't sound different at all.
Yeah. I think it's the way to put it, yeah.
And the other quick question was, when it comes to balancing out your music that you've made, what file formats are you typically using? I don't know if there's a trade-off of like space used in game versus the quality that you want to have. I'm curious if you have any like consistency specifically of what file format you mix out to.
I think it sound design is usually WAV or OG, right? And then music is almost always WAV, I think. Is that not true?
By and large, game engines are going to do all the file compression for you. So exporting to lossless is the key.
Okay, cool. And the other question, the like more substantial one is, if you, let's say you're at a space where you have done, some level of composition, feel like you're in a space where it can compose at a pretty reasonable level, like a reasonable portfolio and things like that. Then at that kind of stage, how do you think you go about, I guess, looking for work, reaching out to people, networking, finding jobs from there with the skill set already established, the technical end, I guess, already established?
Finding composition jobs?
Yeah, I guess I'll say mainly composition jobs.
That's the question, isn't it? That's the big question everyone wants to know the answer to. There's no real answer. It's kind of like for AAA studios, they put up they'll put a job posting, but in 99 times out of 100, that job is already taken by someone that they knew. And it's the job posting publicly is more or less for posterity. There's a couple exceptions. I think Hexani is the one company that I know of. Virtually all the AAA composition things that are job postings that are public that I know of that you could actually maybe even think about getting are all like orchestral stuff. So if you're trying to do like synthwave stuff for like a AAA game studio, unless you know somebody, it's probably not going to happen, unfortunately. And then networking with people, meeting people. I mean, like, I'm assuming there are a lot of students here, and so being a student, I would argue that like being a student in like a game design course track is like the best time in your whole life to network for other game dev stuff, because once you go out into the real world, there's not going to be that kind of stuff. You're going to have to pay hundreds of or thousands of dollars to go to conventions and buy flights and stuff. You're not going to be able to like have this like free networking opportunity. So I would, if you're like a student, you definitely have a big jump on that already. And then, yeah, I don't know, use anybody else anything to add this big nature.
Yeah, I agree with all of that. I think that being, at least for AAA stuff, like being a little open-minded as to like what kind of audio work you can do in games might open up what possibilities you would have getting into the industry, and eventually settling more into a niche that like you're pursuing, i.e. composing or sound design or whatever. For me specifically, I think I got kind of really lucky. Like I said, I was in a spot of like burnout where I didn't want to like record records or anything or make music. And the posting that got me in to the industry was for Halo Infinite, and it was a music editor role. And when I did the interview, I was just really upfront about like, I don't want to do anything that creative, like just give me the music to edit. Like I don't want to mix it, I don't really want to like I definitely don't want to compose it. And it was maybe just like a specific niche that they were looking for that I was like, yeah, I don't want to, I just want to like edit the thing. I don't really want to do anything else to it. And they're like, great, that's exactly what we needed. Yeah.
Real quick, could I ask what a music editor role or game audio or what would that be?
Sure. The question was what a music editor role would be. For Halo Infinite, that really came down to like receiving orchestral recorded sessions and sort of reorchestrating the music or omitting some of the stems in order to get more mileage out of the cue, so that it could be restructured in game and be perceived longer. An example is like the composer might have composed something that was 2 minutes and 30 seconds, and like how can we squeeze 10 or 12 minutes out of that after it's already been recorded. So I guess there was some sort of like musical know-how or creativity. Maybe it was a more than I had just made it seem probably. But it was more so like how to like restructure recorded music that had already been mixed, already been mastered, into a way that it could be put directly into the game, like the last step before it went into the game. Again, that's just my experience, and that's just like my experience from a really specific project that had a really laid out and clear music plan, but every project is different. Like I assume that some of the games you work on and compose for that you're doing all of the music for, you do the plan yourself. And I assume it's the same with you as well.
Yeah.
And I mean, you're doing all of the composing, mixing, and editing yourself and then placing it into the game. But for Halo, at least, it was like music editor in that role was a really, really, really specific niche discipline.
Yeah, just sort of returning to answer the freelancing question. I feel like what's helped me a lot is I kind of knew early that as someone who didn't have a like college undergrad background in orchestral music or whatever, that I was never going to be able to compete with those people at all. So I kind of just was like, well, I don't like doing that stuff. I'm not that good at it. Like I come from like a punk and rock background and listen to a lot of experimental music, and like that's all stuff that really informs my work. And I like doing electronic music, and I like doing sampling. So if my music could just center around that stuff, like I'm gonna be happier, and it's gonna just turn out better, and I won't be forcing anything. So like the advice that I heard at some point along the way was like just like be the loudest version of yourself that you know how to be. And you'll attract those who want to be around you, and you'll push away those who don't want what you're selling, I guess. And so these days, like when people come to me for music, it's because they want something that's a little more weird, a little quirkier. And that's what happened with Rift, is like Danny had seen my portfolio somewhere along the way, but was collecting composers for working together on Rift, and he was just like, yeah, we want someone to do a bunch of weirdo stuff. So the one track that's out right now is like Jamiroquai-esque, like disco with like violin and like synths mixed with like spooky, necromancer vibes. So just don't pigeonhole yourself, and don't fight people on fronts that you don't need to, I guess.
So we have another question from the Q&A panel. I'm actually going to throw two at you. They're vague. I don't know. They're not related at all. I'm just going to give you two anyway. From Ryan, who just graduated from the game program last year.
Congrats, Ryan.
And
yeah, give it up for Ryan, everybody. Yeah, Ryan.
He did audio for two different senior projects, and just got credit for the one for it. But anyway, you mentioned networking and the advantages of networking as a student, and how hard it is once you're not a student anymore. And Ryan, who's no longer a student, wants to know if you'll swap emails and contact information, and maybe do some portfolio reviews. So that's that request out there. Are you willing to put yourselves out there?
Sure. Yeah, of course.
And the follow-up question is not related, but as a freelance worker, have you set up your own LLC, business licensing kind of stuff? Do you do that? How early did you do it? How important was it for you to have that stuff lined up?
I was gonna say I haven't done that. I'm still DBA, so I'm not gonna answer anything else on this question.
Yeah, I have an LLC. It is based out of the state of Delaware because it's the cheapest. And I did it maybe a year or so into me composing for games, roughly. And then with that comes with a bunch of, your tax situation gets more complicated, but I'm not going to get into that. It's annoying. But there's cool things you can do, like you can measure, my studio is in my room, so you can measure your room, the square footage of your room, and that's your studio, and so you can write that off. So that's like an interesting,
Wait, sorry, I just want to add, I will say I can do that also as DBA, so that's not LLC exclusive.
Oh, I didn't
just
know
to be
that.
clear. Yeah.
Yeah, it's sole proprietorship can do the same thing.
and one of the things I didn't even know. But you can, you don't need an LLC, but I have one.
It can be useful. Hopefully it doesn't need to be. I say this as someone who, I'm not freelancing anymore, but I only did sole proprietorship when I was. So I'm also not really able to give the exact answer.
Yeah, I mean, the main reason to, like, from my understanding is that, is that if you are sued or something, then they couldn't just fully bankrupt you directly. It would only bankrupt your LLC. So it is smart to do. You should do it. I haven't done it.
Also, there's also a couple, I think I paid $200 to the company that keeps my company renewed every year, and then another, no, I paid $300 a year to keep it going, and then another 180 to a company. It's complicated, but it's basically the company is based out of Chicago, but my company is based out of Wilmington, Delaware, and so it's that they're an office that sets it up for you out of a third place. So it's complicated. You do pay a little bit of money for it. It's not terribly expensive so far.
Other questions from the audience?
One thing I've always wondered is, how would you go about making a sound, particularly a more fantastical artificial sounds of something that might not actually exist.
You're all staring at me. I mean, it depends. What sound are we talking about? What kind of sound are we talking about? There are a lot of things that don't exist in this world.
Let's go with alien.
Oh, creature sounds. I'm bad at those. But so there are a lot of pretty common tricks that are used. A lot of often slowing down animal sounds is pretty common for that. But the reason I'm not able to give you an immediate answer now is it depends on what it is. The style of the game, or if we're talking just more broadly sound design, the style of the medium, what the actual alien is. If it's a little bug, it's going to sound different than a gigantic like a dinosaur-like thing. It really depends. But often, if you're talking creature sounds, there's usually something that's based in the real world, in actual animals, to ground it, to make it more familiar to human ears. But it's a lot of trial and error. That's the answer, I think.
I was gonna say my favorite like fantasy sounds are the ones that have just like weird, freaky stuff mixed in. These aren't really quite aliens, but the angels from Evangelion, if anyone here has seen Evangelion. It's really great. I think it's like Angel 4, Angel 6, I forget which one, but has like a laser. It's like a giant ISO, whatever, 2 pyramids stacked on top of each other, and it has a giant laser that it shoots out. And buried into the mix of that laser is like a woman just screaming at the top of her lungs and like a choir of people, and then it's just like also, you know, generic laser stuff, but it's so freaky and so weird. And if you had a chance to see the 4th movie in IMAX, you got treated to a lot of those sounds way out loud. It was awesome. But yeah, so definitely go recommend watching the Evangelion. I think that was from the movie. It's sick.
I had a question about, like, this is more of like pricing, and when you're freelancing, more often than not, I've undervalued myself, and I've found it difficult to find a good like pricing strategy, or even just approaching a client with, you know, this is what I want to do, like this is how much money I need to survive.
Yeah.
So can you give me that?
Yeah, I'm gonna jump in first, sorry, just to talk again, but I feel really strongly about this stuff. So as someone who has seriously undervalued herself, especially starting out, like when I worked on Blossom Tales, I asked for $75 a minute and they were like, yeah, okay, sure. Well, yeah, okay. And I didn't know any better at the time because I had looked on Reddit and I saw someone on Reddit say that that's what they charged. So the number one thing I think you can do for yourself is just talk to everyone you meet and ask them what their rate is, like straight up. My rate these days, when I'm working on music stuff alone, I charge anywhere from like $800 per minute to like $1,100 per minute. And that's like pretty, I would say average for someone of my experience level now, going on, you know, like 7 years working in the industry. When you're starting out, I don't think you should really start out below $300 per minute of completed music, because while that sounds like a lot of money, if you do the calculations of how long it takes you to make 1 minute of music, your hourly starts looking really, really slim. And so, you know, a baseline for freelancers in the US like should be like around $50 per hour, because you're probably paying for your healthcare, you're paying for emergencies in the future, you're paying for all these other expenses that should be built into the cost of the rate that you're charging. So if you're charging less than that, like, you're just not going to make ends meet, like, fundamentally. And I'm in a place of privilege, like I don't have student loans, so like I also want to be like clear about that stuff when I'm talking about my rate. And sometimes you got to take what you got to take just to make rent or whatever. But there's always ways to make the agreement more fair, whether that's rev share if someone doesn't have the budget to pay you it up front, or skill trading. I've done gigs on skill trading where people have taught me things or traded art assets or whatever for my own stuff. So yeah, this is something I'm very passionate about, and we can talk more if you want, Sean, after this.
I haven't done freelance rates for music, but I have done a fair bit of that for sound design. And kind of actually going back to your question about like what it is you're going to be putting into the project, or like being upfront with whoever is managing the project, like what it is you're going to be doing. If it's just sounds, if it's just sounds from an asset list, or if you're going to be the one implementing them, really we'll be able to like quantify like what kind of work you're actually going to be putting into the project, and coming up with a better number. For sound design, this is my own experience, I found it nice to give the project manager a nice round number of like, this is what I think will be fair for this entire project. We could split up the payments in different months or whatever. But I found that worked for me. And definitely overvalue yourself. Don't undervalue yourself, because that's just going to make the work start to feel like a bummer when you're doing it. Like you want to be, I mean, you can't always be happy when you're doing work, but you don't want to you definitely don't want to be pissed when you're doing the work. Yeah, that is what I have to say on the matter.
I thought that was very well said by Cameron and Josie. Yeah, if you're, I think the first project I ever made music for, I asked them for like, I think it was like $125 for an hour of completing music, and with all the revisions and stuff and all the stuff I had to do, it ended up being like $350 an hour, which like you start to resent the work, like Cameron said. You're just like, I don't know this, why this sucks. But I think maybe a lot of people need to go through that once to like feel how painful it is, because then like, okay, I'm gonna do it. Like, yeah. So charging like an uncomfortable, it seemed as like a level that's uncomfortable at first. It's like, I'm gonna charge you like $1,000, and just like, wow, 4 digits. Like, could I do that? Like, yeah, you can do that. And yeah, flat rates are generally the way to go, because it's just a lot easier for the person that you're working for to like keep track of. And then if there's more music added on, you can say, hey, like, we've reached this kind of milestone, and like we can re-up. Like, I've done everything you asked me to, and now we can re-up for like another set of deliverables that can now deliver some more stuff. So you can charge them again. You can tack something else on or not. But yeah, undervaluing yourself as just as any artist, really creative person. Plus, inflation has gotten like so out of control the last couple of years. It's just like, I think Josie said 300 bare minimum. I think it's like a decent ballpark to like start with. Yeah. And yeah, full disclosure, my student loans are paid off. I also don't have a car. I don't have car payments. I'm really lucky. I don't have any like prescriptions like paid for or anything. Like I don't have glasses and stuff. So like I live in South Philly where it's pretty cheap. And so I managed to like live within the margins as an artist. And if I lived in another city, that might not be the case. And so I don't have a lot of expenses on my end to make that work. So I'm privileged in that sense. So, but also underprivileged sometimes as an artist, because you think that your music doesn't sound good, but it does. Because you're also, one more thing I should add, you're not just charging for like the work you're doing. You're charging like all the hundreds and thousands of hours you spent learning like your DAW and learning composition, and like all the grind that you did for years. Like that's what you're really charging for, really. So yeah.
And kind of an equipment rental too, for that matter.
Yeah, all the Rollins you got to rent from Alex.
Well, I've spent enough money on microphones. You're paying me some money to use those microphones. And I always got away with doing stuff hourly. And I used to charge $45 per hour. I would charge more now.
I wanted to ask on that subject. Do any of you guys have like contract templates for yourselves? And if you do, would you be open to sharing any of those or any information about your kind of contracting kind of strategies and things like that?
I do not.
Yeah.
I copied one out of a book in a Barnes and Noble in 2014, and then slowly was adding on to that over and over again over time. At some point, once you've had enough contracts, it's definitely worth, and I've been meaning to do this, but I also just moved recently, so I've been putting it off. Just sit down with a lawyer, be like, hey, can you make me a contract that I can just reuse with a bunch of different clients? And then you have it, and then it'll be good to go. I would, definitely recommend having, if you're working with friends still, like a casual contract, just to have all the terms down. Like, if it's with friends, just making sure you have it all down on paper so that you can refer back to it, because sometimes I forget what was the scope of the project we agreed on, or how much we were paying for a specific thing, or what the percent rev share was. So it's always just really, really helpful, and it's just smart to do. And contracts are awesome.
A lot of times a contract it's actually two things. It's a contract that says what you're going to do, and then the last page or second half of it is what's called a work order, which is where you have like, this is what I'm actually going to make and deliver for you. And then like, I'm going to make you 2 songs, and they're 2 minutes each, so it's 4 minutes of music. And so the contract itself is like, this is an agreement between 2 parties, yada yada yada. And then the work order is the second half of it, and then you can sign both of them. You can sign one at the bottom for everything. It's all kind of, there's no industry standard, by the way, for like contracts or for like rates to charge. It's all just very kind of wild westy, I guess you could say, for lack of a better term.
I know, sorry, we have another question online when we get to it, and we're actually at 9, and so technically we're wrapping it up soon, but hey, as long as everybody's interested, and we can keep going for a little bit longer. So it's up to you guys how long you want to continue sitting up there, whether you have dinner waiting for you or whatever. Anyway, Jared asks, when you're directing someone who's providing audio, whether it's a musician or a voice actor, the whole spectrum, what is something you wish they would do either before the session or during the session? So I don't know, I guess there's been a theme of sort of looking for pet peeves of the process and things like that. But when you are working with somebody and you're in the booth and or in the studio recording stuff, what are things you're looking for that person to bring?
Like the person
performance wise, are they prepared? What do you want them to come prepared to do? What is something that is maybe common that they don't come prepared to do, which would be odd, I guess, at a professional level. But maybe somebody's starting out, they're not quite sure what to expect. I think that's kind of where Jared's question is coming from.
They want something that the person in charge shouldn't do, is what you're saying.
So the performer, what do you want as if you're in the studio about to record something, somebody's there, either a musician or a voiceover actor or somebody who's bringing something in. What can that person, the performer, bring to the moment?
What can the performer bring to the moment? Well, I guess it depends on the director. If you're making a piece of music for a director, you do what they ask you to do. And then if they want you to change it, then you change it because you're working for them. Unless they're like your buddy, in which case you can it's more informal. Being clear on terms, like if you want, they say like, oh, can your synthesizer sound a little bit more blue? Like that could mean like 100 different things. So like be specific on like what you actually mean. Because people that like to just use terms to describe music that make sense to them, but doesn't make sense to you. And then for voice stuff, that's all like I've been directed in a few voice sessions too, and it's all just kind of just like, can you make this sound like, you'll do like a growl, like can you make this sound like a little less wet? Can you make this sound like a little more like whatever? Like, so doing voice stuff, the direction is a little more like line to line, so that's a little bit easier, a little less vague. In terms of sound stuff, I don't know. Okay.
I've been saying this a lot, but clarity is like everything. So it could be as clear as you can to the person that you're directing. I'll share a really quick anecdote of the first batch of deliverables I made for the game Smelter, they wanted 16-bit sounds. And the game looked like, it was like a Super Nintendo style game. Really amazing sprite work. So I got really in my head about like how those games sounded. And I played a lot of them, whatever. And I delivered my first batch of like electric, the protagonist could use like an electric whip, and I made these sounds, and I bit crushed them a bit, and I was like, this is cool, they're gonna like it, and they hated it. They just were like, this is not the direction we wanted to go. And I'm like, 16-bit, like this kind of, it's literally 16-bit, like sounds kind of like retro and whatnot. I'm really glad that I submitted that first batch of deliverables. It wasn't many in the context of the game, and I guess what I'm getting at is like it can't hurt to give them a sample of like what you're working on, to see if like you're on the right track as to like what they're asking for, especially if they're not being clear in their language and don't know how to speak in terms of like what a sound designer or composer might use to make whatever it is they're making. Because in my case, at least, they're like, oh, this doesn't sound really what we were looking for. And I'm like, well, miscommunication here, but like, we can move on from this, and then my next batch could be totally like what they're looking for. And that's exactly what happened. Once we got over the hump of like, you're not looking for 16-bit sounds. The game looks like it's a 16-bit game, but you just want really high fidelity sounds. It was nice to get over that hump, and then the rest of the project was kind of smooth sailing. But yeah, it was nice to just like be like, what do you think about this, batch of 5 sounds, 6 sounds, or whatever. Yeah.
I've been working a lot with a lot of remote musicians lately for projects, and it's great because I have a couple now that I've worked with a couple of times that I can just like really write slash marks on the sheet music and just be like, improvise here. And I know that Sarah Hubbard, this violinist I've worked with, she's incredible and just can improvise whatever, and like I can let her do that. But I have other musicians who are not as comfortable like kind of just going with the flow and bringing their own personality and their own compositional vibe to recording. And so I think one thing I'm learning is I need to be more clear when my sheet music that I'm handing a remote player is more of a guideline or a suggestion, like I kind of want this, but like I also want you to bring your own personality to it, versus I want this specific thing. And then sometimes I'll realize after the fact, oh, actually I do want something more like this. So it can definitely be a process. So I think, yeah, as a solo person or a person who's doing a recording, just sort of gauging what amount of to the T you're being asked is good, and it's definitely a clarity thing that I'm working on for sure.
Okay. Just make sure you're not clipping. Period. I'm and Jared, this is not directed at you. I'm going to just leave it at that. Or perhaps I should also say, less snarkily, really, making sure that you're not clipping is very important to anyone editing voiceover, especially if it's being done remotely. And that includes overloading your preamps on your audio interface, presuming you're recording directly to the audio interface, as well as just overloading the microphone. And those are really extremely important, basically, because you can't recover that stuff easily, if at all. And that includes using iZotope RX. But yeah. And if you need to, backing away from the mic works for that. And just pay attention to your levels. That's pretty much it.
We got one last question from the internet, if it's okay, because I know we're at overtime, but if that's okay with the panel, just go to one last question.
Yeah. I think I don't want to speak for other people. I'm down to answer some more questions here afterwards as well.
That's
Just like in person, not in front of the panel.
I'll just add as an aside, this has been an awesome panel, and I love the mix of the audience that we have here, and yay, all of you.
Yeah, thank you for having us.
So thank you for being here.
Thanks, Rob.
Giving us the time is.
Yeah, thanks, Rob.
So, Ryan, our poor Senate graduate, hardworking, talented, clever Ryan. Any weird and wacky tools or plugins you've been obsessed with recently? I've been loving Breaking RX's noise reduction stuff. He actually typed out the head.
Accurately represented.
Been really liking SoundFlow. I had mentioned it earlier. It's not really a plugin. It actually doesn't do anything with, doesn't produce any sound. It doesn't change the sound. But I have found it as a fun tool to automate systems and in DAWs. You know, even outside of what I do for work, just if I'm composing music for myself, or well, that's really all I do in the sound realm outside of work. Just automating out systems that or workflows that I don't want to click and drag anything. It's just super cool to like have that stuff on Mac. PC folks are probably scoffing because you could just do that out of the box, but
No comment.
yeah, it's been great for me. I actually deleted all my Waves plugins a few weeks ago, just because
Yeah.
the whole Unity thing like really turned me off from like subscription stuff, and I don't know. I'm about there with Pro Tools as well soon. So
Let's go.
no more sounds.
I've been getting into, I'm really into like granular synthesis plugin, which is just granular synthesis is a type of synthesis that I could talk about forever, but it's mostly software, but there's some hardware stuff out there too. But where it gets interesting is if you kind of if you take you have a granular synth plugin and connect it to just like a reverb or just a delay and not the actual instrument, then it gets pretty interesting. So that's what I've been getting into recently, or rather like the last like several years.
Oh, so the project we're working on doesn't really allow for a whole lot of that at the moment. So the most recent thing I did was in fact also use RX D what was it? I think it was D-Click to make some really gross sounding stuff. And as far as granular stuff goes, I back in, because it's been a while since I've done anything particularly interesting like that. Back in January, I bought a pair of electrostatic microphones, and pitching some recordings I did of a CRT that's actually sitting right over there for me, with pitching them the hell down, because electrostatic stuff's way above range of human hearing usually. Combining that with a granular plugin like Hudak G, get some really fun sparky sounds. But otherwise, I've just been doing pretty normal Foley-ish stuff.
That's sick though. I always like weird like misuses of technology to make sounds. Juan Pablo Uribe, who works at Bungie, has a bunch of really cool videos online of him working in Reaper and recording the output of the computer while he drags sounds while the playhead is moving in Reaper and getting cool like glitchy stuff that way.
Yeah.
I introduced my old roommates recently to the fact that on YouTube, if you press the number keys, it'll just skip to that part of the video. So basically, if you press 1 a bunch of times, you end up with a sample of whatever sound of the YouTube video is at the start of the video. And if you press 5, you'll hear a sample of the sound that's halfway through the YouTube video. And so you can just pull up whatever random YouTube video, like find the performance of cello or whatever, and just start sampling away. And we had 3 laptops going with that, and we were just jamming and messing around. So that was a really fun night. It was
That's
really
rad.
fun for the 3 of us. It was awful for the 5 other people who were in the room watching us do it. Yeah, but yeah, I love stuff like that.
Awesome, very cool. Well, I want to concur with what Rob said. Thank you all so much for your time and expertise and joining us on the panel today.
Sure.
Um,
Thank you again.
Before I
Thanks.
let you all go, where can people find you on the internet and go to support your work?
I'm just my name.com. So Josie Brechner, BRECHNER.com. I'm also on Blue Sky, I guess, these days. And yeah, I'm very approachable. So if you're out there online and want to say hi, feel free to pop me a question.
I'm C Konner Audio on Twitter, and my website is just my name, CameronConner.com. I don't post too much, but maybe I'll one day get better at that.
I think Michael Hudak is basically everything on my, so MICHAELHUDAK. That's my name on Bandcamp, on Discord, on SoundCloud. I think there's an 18 after it on Twitter, maybe, yeah. And then, yeah, so that's me.
Okay, my website is, well, I just went over it earlier today to make sure there isn't anything horrifically inaccurate on it. Otherwise, it needs a touch up. It is alexcolesound.com. If you want to email me, it's alex@alexcolesound.com. But I'm around on Discord a bunch. I'm my name on the Philly Game Mechanics and Philly IGDA servers. Equinox Fracture is my username on there, as well as on Blue Sky. And I'm also on Airwiggles under my name. And I'm doing my best to sign in there a bit more too. And yeah, as far as supporting me goes, well, PHL released the game earlier, Justice League Cosmic Chaos, and we haven't announced our next game, so I'll post when we do as well. I'm sure someone else from PHL will post it.
Awesome. Thank you all again so much. And thank you all of you here in person with us. And thank you everybody who joined us over Zoom tonight. I think this was very successful. Awesome. Thank you all again. This is great.